We're like starting live. Cool. Okay, great. Hi everyone. Um, and welcome. Um, we are getting off to a funny start here, but welcome to the Folk Plus Town Hall, Navigating US Travel and Visa Challenges for Artists. This is a virtual Q&A style webinar focused on traveling into the United States with a spotlight on the latest updates and ongoing challenges related to artist visas. Whether you are an international artist, manager, or industry professional, this session will provide timely insights, expert guidance, and space for your questions. My name is Hilary Saunders. I'm the managing editor at No Depression, which is a music publication published by the not-for-profit Fresh Grass Foundation. And I am also a first-term new board member for Folk Alliance. Really pleased to be here. And a couple things up front, a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to start with some brief introductions to our esteemed panel members, who I can tell you from personal experience are intelligent and kind and very good at what they do. And also funny, let it not be forgotten. And then we're going to open it up and focus on your questions. So if you'd like to tell us in this poll that I think Cindy's going to be sending out where you're from, that'll help us sort of tailor the responses to meet your needs the best we can. And I just popped up on my screen, so that's great. Thank you so much. And then if you would like to submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A box, I will screen and select the questions and then throw them to our panel. So let's get started then. Let's start with Will, because normally we're both based in New York City. Tell us who you are, what your title is, where you are based, although I just gave that one away, and then throw it to a panelist that you've worked with before.
Sure. Well, I've worked with all of the panelists, which is great. Leanna should be joining us shortly. My name is Will Spitz. I am an immigration attorney based in Brooklyn. I'm a partner at a law firm called Covey Law. Covey Law focuses on the legal needs of mostly the international arts community. I lead our performing artist visas team, which pretty much exclusively works on O&P visa petitions for performing artists who are coming to perform in the US. I also do some work with our affiliated nonprofit organization, which is called Thomasdot. Some of you may know Thomasdot. Yeah, I don't know if I need to go into that much more detail now, but yeah, I'm the US visa lawyer guy on this panel. I guess we can put it that way. The last time I spoke at a Folk Alliance event was at Folk Alliance, the annual conference in 2017, I think. I was on a panel with Leanna, who's going to be joining us shortly. So it's been a while. It's nice to be back. Thank you, Cindy, for having me, and to Hillary for moderating this discussion. I'm excited.
Great.
I'm supposed to throw it to someone else. Paula.
Yeah.
Thank you, Will. Hi, everyone. I'm Paula Abreu. I'm the Director of Programming. I'm a Carter Theater Center in Princeton, New Jersey. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I've been on panels with Will as well, and Mahmoud. I'm here to talk about the perspective from the presenter side of things. I've been working, before McCarter, I worked at Summer Stage in New York for 10 years. And I've been, dealing a lot with international artists, presenting them, proud to be presenting them, and hope to be helpful today. So thank you again. Popcorn to Mahmoud now.
Hi, Hi, my name is Mahmoud Sheikh. I'm a booking agent at an agency called Concerted Efforts. I'm based in Chicago, but we're primarily based in New York and Boston and have agents Massachusetts and California. I work primarily representing artists within North America, but also additional territories. And as far as international artists that I represent in North America, those are primarily from United Kingdom, Europe, and Japan. Yeah, and I've worked with some of my esteemed colleagues on with presenting the artists in North America, but also prepping our visas for North American performances. And I would popcorn it to someone, but I think I'm the last of the line for right now.
Liana is apparently on her way having tech issues. So we're just going to keep going because I have a few more questions for y'all, and she is just going to have to answer them all in quick succession. So in a few sentences, will you please describe the work that you do? You just gave us your title, but like explain it in a little bit more detail from us, and we can kind of go in the same popcorn circle here, virtual circle.
Sure. So my work is focused on helping non-US artists get US work visas to perform in the US. So our firm and my team specifically is involved. We work with artists, managers, agents, promoters, presenters, festivals from all over the world and here in the US to get the appropriate visas so that artists can work and tour in the US. I've been doing this work for about 11 years. Before I went to law school, Hillary and I talked about this when we were prepping for this call. My old life, I was a music journalist and a musician. And so that's sort of how I got into this. I got interested in immigration in law school and was lucky enough to marry these two sort of seemingly very different interests, immigration law and the arts and music in one job. And yeah, so that's me. That's what I do. Did I miss anything, Hillary? Is that sort of
No,
what
you just got ahead of my questions, but I
Okay.
appreciate it nonetheless.
Okay, cool.
Paula, do you want to go
Is it
next?
me? Yeah, sure. So McCarter Theater Center is a performing arts center on the campus, located on the campus of Princeton University. We're an independent performing arts center. A typical American performing arts center would bring artists from all sorts of regions, multi different disciplines, from dance to music to family programs, talks. About 45 to 50 events a year, individual events. And we also produce theater plays, which I think is a unique thing about McCarter compared to other theater performing arts centers in the country. McCarter has been around for a while, for almost 100 years. Um, as a performing arts center presenter, maybe 60. And yeah, my role as a director of programming, we do basically I'm booking all the talent that is coming and performing in McCarter. So uh, we deal with agents, we deal with artists directly, with managers, and yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, so my role as an agent is I represent a roster of artists and arrange for their performances, as I mentioned, primarily in North America. And that could be, you know, a single concert festival or a routed tour of the entire, you know, entire territory. And in the context of artist visas, I will be, you know, I'll work hand in hand with someone like Will and Covey Law to gather all the information required to you know, apply for the visa. In some instances, we're the sponsor for the artist visa. And yeah, I don't know if I've just nutshelled it too much there, but I think if people have found themselves at this you know, this seminar, they might be aware of arranging concerts and the need to get a visa. So we're just an integral component there. We also work with the individual promoters of all of the performances to help with additional information to relay over to Covey Law or the corresponding firm to get our visas approved.
Great, thanks y'all. I have one more question for y'all that's a little bit more, about your personal experiences, which is just like, how did you get into this field, and why do you do the work that you do?
I sort of already answered this, I guess, but I can elaborate a little bit. Or at least I can answer the latter question, since I think I answered the former already. But the reason I do what I do and enjoy doing what I'm doing is just, I'm a fan of the performing arts, a fan of music. I mean, that's been my identity since I was a kid. And particularly, I'm a believer in the importance of international cultural exchange, I think, especially in a time like we're in now, finding ourselves in the midst of another Trump administration. Our government is led by xenophobic people who want to keep international culture out of the country. I think our jobs are more important now than ever. I think the role that the arts and music play in building empathy across cultures is really, really important. And to be able to play a small role in that is really gratifying, even if, the paperwork itself can be boring and frustrating and the process can be annoying. No one likes dealing with the visas. It's always, the last thing anybody wants to be doing. But obviously, until we find a different system, they're necessary. And yeah, just to be able to try to make the visa process as accessible as possible is a really, that's what motivates me.
That's great. Thank you, Will. Welcome, Liana. And yay! We're just going around. I'm asking folks a few questions. So we're going to finish this circuit, and then I'm going to have you introduce yourself and make sure all the participants know who you are. So welcome. Thanks for being here. Paula, I'm going to pass it to you. Why do you do what you do?
Thank you. I'm originally from Brazil. I moved to New York City in 2010. But before that, without going too much further, from Brazil, I went to Angola for 6 months when I was about 23, 24 years old to work in a project that had nothing to do with arts. But the power of cross-cultural connections and collaborations just blew my mind as a Brazilian in another country that speaks Portuguese, was colonized by Portugal. But it just made me realize the power of culture. When I moved to New York in 2010, I decided that was my life mission. And I was lucky enough to land a summer stage, this festival that's very multicultural, that represents all different cultures in the New York City fabric. So I got the chance to work with many different types of artists coming from everywhere. And yeah, it's been like a life mission, and I'm trying to expand that in different regions now in New Jersey, and at McCarter Theater, my job. Even though the programming it wasn't as eclectic when I arrived, but I've been definitely trying to push the boundaries and expand some of the horizons here. Yeah.
So you asked, the question is why are we doing what we're doing?
Yes. How did you get into this field of work, and why do you do the work that you do?
I ask myself the second question every day. I suppose it started in college, being involved with college radio, and out of that, setting up concerts, shows, kind of more on a DIY level. Post-college, was living in Boston, working for a venue there, and there was a point at which I was like, well, rather than work with 30 bands a month, why not work with one band and try and present them across the country, or and so it kind of shifted more onto the agent side of things, and 20 years later have been doing this. And as far as working with foreign artists, a lot of it is just like you want to see that artist be able to come to the States and have a productive tour and have a productive career. And that's kind of been the motivation, is just like really being a fan of some of these artists and enabling them a pathway to tour successfully in the States.
Fab. Thanks, Mahmood. Liana, I'm gonna bring you back in here. So will you please briefly introduce yourself, who you are, what your title is, where you're based, and describe the work that you do.
Hello. So I'm Liana White. I am the executive director of the Canadian National Office of the American Federation of Musicians. I fell into the position by kind of dumb luck, as I usually like to say. And I've been with the organization and in the labor movement for almost 30 years now. When I first started with the American Federation of Musicians, I started as a visa administrator, and it was right when there was a change from what was the J1, for those who might remember that are on the line, and then evolved into the P2. So I've been there almost from the start of this. Yeah, I mean, why do I do what I do? Sometimes I don't know, but I think that the short answer is that I'm just a person who's in my nature. I like to help people, and this has always been something that has helped musicians' careers, especially Canadians, or anywhere from the world. It seems to be the U.S. market is where you want to break into to get a footing, and not that all other markets can't be lucrative as well. It just seems like the U.S. has been the holy grail for eons for artists, and I enjoy it. It can be very, very rewarding when you've helped a musician reach their goal and get what they need to further their career, but then there's the downsides too, which we'll probably which we'll definitely get into a little bit later in the conversation. And most specifically, what I, or more rather the Federation does, is that the AFM is a recognized petitioner of by USCIS under what's called the reciprocal exchange program. So because we have offices in both the United States and Canada, and it is one organization, we are able to petition for what is called the P2 visa. And it is specific to union members, specific to Canadian union members. So it's very niche in that regard. In the grand scheme of all things visa, what we do is a little bit niche. Yeah, I think that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah. So, like I said, y'all, esteemed panel, thank you again to everyone for being here. And thanks to Cindy and Team Folk Alliance for bringing us together. So the next step in this, we're going to go over kind of like a basic overview of the US visa process before even touching anything related to the current administration, current events, broader issues. Thank you again for completing that poll and telling us where y'all are based. It looks like mostly US, Canada, and a couple folks in Australia, so or down under in general. So again, thank you all for being here. So I think, Liana, do you want to keep going on this and kind of start with a general overview of like the types of visas?
Yes, so there's various classifications of visa. Again, as I had said, the AFM specializes in the P2, but there is also a P1. So a band from Australia, for instance, would likely petition for a B1, and that would be that. It's very, very much the same as a P2. And Canadians could qualify for a P1 as well, but typically if you're going to get a P class, you might as well get the P2. And then there is the O1 for artists of extraordinary ability. And it's for one artist. And of course, this, a feature performer, and, let me say Justin Bieber, for instance. He's the name, he's the front person, he's got, backup band, and, even dancers, whatever are supplemental workers, and they would all come under what is called an O2, which is the essential support to that primary feature artist. There is also a P3, which is intended to be specific towards cultural performance, and culturally unique performance, and it which does not mean a Canadian rock band singing about the prairies kind of thing. It is it's a little bit more, it would be more concentrated than that. Or more defined as cultural than something as broad like that. So there are many classifications, again, and the AFM does not petition for those other classifications, but a lot of Canadian artists will accelerate to the O, and I do call it accelerate because, again, you do have to prove that you are an artist of extraordinary ability, and a recognition. You don't necessarily have to be well known, but you have to have quite the resume. And that visa can be valid for up to 3 years, whereas all of the P class visas can only be valid for up to 1 year. All of the visas, with the exception of the O is a couple of dollars more, but they are all pretty much the same price. And that is, and then, there's different tiers to pricing, but I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole just yet. If somebody had any specific questions on, hey, how much would this cost me? Then I'm sure that, the panelists can, the audience can reach out to the panelists, and then we could give you the specific cost, because it can boil down to who is petitioning for you, and, the venue, the size of the venue that you are performing at. So, that's the general overview. There's also times where you don't need a visa, which I know is going to be covered by my peer here, Will, at some point when it when it pleases the moderator. But
Yep.
With respect to the actual confirmed, paid, again, well, actually, I shouldn't specify paid, but your professional engagements, your tours, they're all going to require a visa that I have just highlighted.
Yeah, Will. Carry on.
Sure, yeah.
When do artists, need a visa? Do folks need visas even to come to Folk Alliance? Give us some more information along those lines, please.
Sure, yeah. So because the process can be so, the process for getting a work visa, one of the ones that Liana just laid out, can be very onerous. It's expensive, it's time consuming, especially if you're not a Canadian musician getting a P2. The P2 process is a bit easier and usually a lot less expensive than the other classifications, because you typically don't need to hire someone like us to help you prepare the paperwork. The union does it for their members, and so it's generally a lot more affordable. But for anyone who is not Canadian, because it can be such a cost prohibitive and time consuming and difficult process, I think the first question that I like to ask is, do you even need a work visa for whatever the engagement that you're planning on doing? So that's if you're an artist, I think that's the place to start. The general rule is that if you are coming to the US to perform, you need a work visa. That's the place to start. There are several important exceptions to that general rule that I'll talk about. But they're very narrow and they only apply in very specific situations. And something that I like to highlight off the bat is whether or not you're being paid does not determine whether or not you need a work visa. So we have artists all the time who are, let's say their album's coming out and they want to do a, like a release show, sort of a promo show in New York. They want to do LA, and that's all they want to do. And they're not making any money. In fact, they're losing a bunch of money. They're playing, Mercury Lounge in New York, and it costs them a bunch of money in promotion and hotels and flights, and they're getting paid $200. Or not getting paid at all. But if the show is open to the general public and it doesn't fit one of these very narrow exceptions to the rule, then they probably do need a work visa. So one exception, which is very relevant for this audience, is the so-called industry showcase exception. That applies in certain situations where it's an industry showcase, and it's really the audience is industry people. It's an industry facing event like Folk Alliance that isn't open to the general public. In situations like that, where the audience is there to consider future engagement with the artist, where it's sort of more like an audition, you're playing for agents, you're playing for presenters and promoters, then you might not need a work visa in that case. The challenge is what constitutes an industry showcase that qualifies for this exception is not really clearly defined. And because it's not clearly defined, there's a lot of gray area, and you're sort of at the mercy of the Customs and Border Protection officer that you encounter on your way into the US, or if you're applying for a visitor visa, which is not a work visa, the consular officer that you're interviewing in front of to get a visitor visa is the one making that ultimate determination about whether or not the event constitutes an industry showcase. So Folk Alliance is one that's pretty clearly falls into that exception. It's not, and then I'll talk about another one. So the other big one is South by Southwest. I'm sure most people here are familiar with South by Southwest. That's a big one that the official South by Southwest showcases have been recognized by the government as industry showcases that qualify for this exception. That might seem weird to you based on what I just said about when the exception applies, since South by Southwest is, those shows are usually open to the general public. Anyone can go, anyone can buy a wristband or buy a ticket. So legally, it's sort of a weird one, but because it's so big and because the government has sort of recognized it as a showcase event, the exception does apply in that case. But if it's a gray area, I recommend first of all, talking to the organizers of the event, but also talking to someone like us, or Thomasdot, better yet, Thomasdot, because Thomasdot can give pro bono advice on whether or not the event that you're coming to do would qualify for an exception. So talk to someone who can help you determine whether or not you need a visa. There are a couple other ones that I'll talk about quickly. That's my doorbell. I think it's just a package. Sorry, I'm at home today. So there's an exception for certain cultural events and that applies when it's a government sponsored event. So government of if the artist's home country's government is sponsoring the event, and paying all the expenses, and it's a non-ticketed event, then the artist probably doesn't need a work visa. So let's say, the Swedish consulate in New York is having an event at Central Park, and it's free, and the Swedish government is paying all the expenses, then the artist doesn't need a work visa in that case. There's also exceptions for academic performances. That's sort of complicated, but if it's an academic performance, the artist might not need a visa. Thing to keep in mind is that if you're coming without a work visa pursuant to one of these exceptions, you can only do that one performance. You can't. So we have artists all the time who are playing South by Southwest, and they're like, well, I want to, while I'm there, I want to do a show in LA and play in New York on my way down. You know, these are small shows. We're not getting paid. Again, we're losing a bunch of money. Like these are not like like why would I need a work visa for these shows? I'm just the main reason I'm coming is for South by Southwest or Folk Alliance. But basically the answer is you do need a work visa if you're doing other shows other than the event that qualifies for the exception. So that's sort of a long answer to when an artist does or doesn't. Sorry, quickly, another thing that comes up a lot is recording. And the rule regarding recording is sort of a weird one. It's sort of outdated. It says that if you are coming to the US, if an artist is coming to the US to use a US recording studio, and there's no intention to release the recording in the US, then the artist doesn't need a work visa. But if there is an intention to release the recording in the US, you do need a work visa. Now it's kind of weird, especially nowadays when everything is distributed internationally on the internet. But basically, the way it's interpreted is if you have a US label and you're doing your new record for your US label, you need a work visa, or if there's a definite intent to release the record or release the recording in the US. If you're coming to just do demos or you're doing songwriting sessions and there's no US entity involved, no US, you're not under contract with a US label or a publisher or something like that, then you can probably do that without a work visa. These are all nuanced things though. And again, I recommend talking to someone if you're not sure, especially nowadays where, scrutiny is a bit higher these days, especially in these gray area situations. We'll talk about this later, but most of the problems we're hearing that artists are having, it's not artists who are coming. When I say problems, I'm talking about like the Trump administration doing, higher scrutiny, more vetting, giving people a hard time at the airport. We're not really hearing, despite what you might be reading in the press, most of those stories, if not all of them, are these sort of gray area situations, not a situation where somebody has the proper visa and is planning to do their work in accordance with that visa. It's more where the situation is a bit murkier. So that's just something to keep in mind in the current climate.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Thank you, Liana, for those sorts of overviews. Just a reminder to all the participants that we have intentionally left the majority of this webinar open for your questions. So please put them in the Q&A box. I have received 0 so far. So I'm going to throw one more question at all of our panelists, but yeah, participants, please drop your questions in the box. Will, you sort of alluded to it, but a lot of folks are nervous about coming to the US these days. And like touring in the US sounds risky. Folks are worried about their digital presence and social media. What do artists need to know right now to make an informed decision? And if that is sort of, I want everyone to answer this. So if that's not sort of your angle, if you could just share a little bit about what you've been hearing or experiencing from your own corner of the industry about international musicians coming to the US to perform.
I'll jump in here. Thus far, we're 6 months into the administration, and from my experience, I've had 3 bands since the end of last year, at the end of the Biden administration, apply for visas, and their consular meetings all happened during the Trump administration. And so far, knock on wood, everything has been kind of normal. And the arrival into the States, while we're hearing about a lot of this, like, scanning through social media and, extra questioning, my artists specifically have not experienced that, which, again, knock on wood. But these are also 3 artists that are coming from the global north, from the United Kingdom. And I think that's something where we might just see, if someone's coming from the Middle East or North Africa or Africa, like there might be a little bit more scrutiny. And unfortunately, there is no real, at least that I've received, direct guidance. A lot of it just depends on the actual human interaction that you have at immigration. So, but yeah, so far things have been normal, but we are only 6 months into the administration. So, I don't know if any of my colleagues here have experienced anything differently, but hopefully this is how things continue for us. And I think that maybe artists should just be aware that that's a potential, and mitigate risk of whatever they're presenting when entering the country.
Yeah, so I'll jump on that. The only denials that I've heard of are those where the person did not have the proper paperwork. So far, so good. If you've got the proper paperwork, then you're okay. In my my specific world, the only times that there's been some delays, and I'm saying they might be held in secondary for about 2 hours, is because of the processing times. And that's one thing we haven't touched on yet, because the processing times right now, they've been horrendous, and they're getting more horrendous, unfortunately, but not to dwell on that point at this moment. Because of the processing times being so tight, and there's these constant backlogs that are announced last minute by USCIS, we don't always get the approval notice, the approval document right away. And so we write a letter and we provide, the like a receipt notice, which is the first official document you get from the United States. And, we say this person is approved, they definitely have access. But because the band or the individual doesn't have that hard copy approval notice, they're being held up for extra scrutiny because they want to see that formal document. But again, that kind of makes sense, and the bands do get through, but that is the biggest holdup that we have, that our members have faced at this time. And what I didn't say, what I glossed over in my intro, is that for Canadians, they actually do not have to attend a U.S. consulate prior to entry. Anybody coming in from the United States from anywhere else in the world does require a consular pre-clearance. So Canadians just have the ability that they get their approval notice and they can go right to the border and get cleared, and have their visa / I-94 issued directly through the border. So hence why that my stories include getting held up a little bit, because they are the clearing there. And because I've said that, I will say permanent residents of Canada do still need to attend a consulate because they are not Canadian citizens. It's very Canadian citizen specific. So you can be born in another country and have gotten your Canadian citizenship, and you're then deemed a Canadian citizen. You don't have to worry, but anybody's here, under their country of birth passport and still retaining that citizenship would have to go to a consulate.
Just to quickly add that from the presenter side, I don't think I haven't seen any specific changes in this first 6 months, to Mahmoud's point. We had one glitch this year, but it was related to paperwork, not because of the changes. So
I unsurprisingly have a lot to say about this topic. But first, I would just be really curious, Paula and Mahmoud, if from your perspectives, have you had artists who have been, expressed hesitancy? Like you're trying to bring an artist here to do a tour, to do a show at McCarter, that have said, you know what, I've heard too much, whether it's visas or anything else. Like I'm skipping the US this time around. I'd love to hear from you guys if that's happened.
Thus far it hasn't happened, and I think we might see that happening as things progress. You know, something that when Leanna mentioned the delays of approvals, something that's changed not just because of the current administration or the previous Trump administration, is just the timeline by, you know, for applying for visas. We're now working on a 6-month from beginning of tour timeline, as opposed to pre-COVID, we were doing 3 months. And that's mainly a result of, you know, the staffing at USCIS was reduced during COVID, and I don't think it's, you know, that they're back at full capacity. And also there was, you know, our artist applications were also being processed alongside asylum seeking applications, which, you know, after the US left Afghanistan, there was just like a huge volume there. So I think by that nature and how early we've been applying and how far out we're booking, I think that this topic is going to rise more when we're getting towards late 2026 touring and 2027 touring. And I think, you know, just not to get too deep into the non-arts portion of this, situation is changing daily. You know, I have friends from Canada who are just opting to not visit America right now, not for any you know, concern about getting in, but just like not, you know, contributing to this economy. And I feel like that is something from the artist level, the risk. You know, I saw a comment in the chat from an Australian band who had postponed their tour, but I think that there's a little bit of risk or concern about the risk, but also just like the situation here in general might not align with some foreign artist aesthetics. So I think that we're gonna see more impact of this late 26 into 27, at least from my perspective, from a planning out stage. Yeah.
I completely agree with you, Mahmoud. I think it's the impact is going to be noticed later. It's not being noticed right now. I did have an artist that I was having conversations with for this November who decided not to, like, that they didn't need to go through this. It was, and I agree. I was like, I don't want to put you in a situation where we spend all these hours, make all this planning, and then it doesn't work. But I have a feeling like other than it was a very specific project, highly, you know, customized for applicable to McCarter and connections with the university, with Princeton University. Other than that, I haven't noticed any change. Of course, people are kind of scared, to lack of a better word. But I fear what's going to be in 1 or 2 years from now, sadly. We'll see.
And I will agree with that. As Mahmoud said, Canadians, I mean, part of it is, you know, a sense of pride and patriotism, especially with, you know, being offered to be the 51st state and such. That did not go over so well with a lot of patriotic Canadians. So some of it's just on principle. You know, we have, you know, and it's people who just don't agree with what's going on in the US, but the majority of Canadian artists are, this is too expensive and too uncertain. And, you know, the position that all of us are in here, us panelists, is none of us can make a guarantee, because we're all at the mercy of the USCIS. We know how to work with the system, or at least what was the system. So we will make our best efforts. We will make sure that, you know, do our best to make sure that everything is a success. But because there are those situations where artists just don't have the extra money to do to pay the premium processing, which is $2,805 US, which you might as well call at least 3,500, maybe 37 Canadian, like that, and that's atop the petitioning fee. So it's very expensive, and then, you know, it's expensive, it's tumultuous, it's, you know, there's all these things. So you know, Canadians are starting to shy away a bit, and in larger numbers. because of the difficulties, sadly. But so far to date, again, and I do agree with my colleagues here, or my panelists are here, in that I believe, people have said, oh, what is the impact? Well, I said, I think it's going to impact next year. We're going to see, I have a feeling it's going to be next year, or maybe even into 27, unless something changes, and very, very soon. So right now it's, it might be for every 2 artists that I, despite everything I just said, speaking out of the other side of my mouth, for every 2 artists that I speak to that have these exceptions against the US, there's 10 who are like, okay, well, how can I get in? What do I have to do? What's the da-da-da-da? So I still have more of a majority that want to still pursue entry versus not, but I guess we'll see how things go.
Thank you all so much for answering that so eloquently, and bringing in other kind of topics into that. You basically already addressed questions that we got from EB Lounge and Encore, specifically regarding timelines. So I'm going to share a question from Kat, who says, I am a US musician looking to perform in Canada. What would be the first steps? What should I be aware of?
Okay, so if you're coming into Canada for a very limited time engagement or series of dates, then you will not require a work permit. If you are coming in to work for one employer, and that can even mean you are part of a Canadian band. So we do, because we share a border, we actually do have a good handful of bands where there's musicians on both sides. When you're working with a band, that band is considered the Canadian engager, and a work permit is required. Also, if you're coming in for any type of recording or broadcast engagement, a work permit is required. So although it can be, it's definitely much less costly. It's 200. If you do require a work permit, it's $230 US. You might, depending on the country you're coming from, which I believe is most, even the UK, you need an electronic travel authorization, but that's like, I think it's pennies, let's say. I believe it's under $20, and it's good for a year.
I just did it less than that and was confirmed the same night. So
yeah, there you go. Okay, so there you go. So it's speedy quick. If you do need a work permit, speedy quick. In a lot of situations, if you're coming in as a singer-songwriter for 14 dates in a row and you're going back to the US, you're not going to need a work permit. So unless, of course, it's CBC is going to be picking up your performances, and then you're going to be recorded and broadcast, that's a different story. So if there's any of that kind of stuff, just always feel free to reach out, and we'll talk you through it. They typically just want to see your engagement contract. We do provide letters of support as well. Depending on the country you're coming from, you may want to get a letter of support from us. When it's entry to Canada, we do provide these letters of support to anyone coming in, whether they're a member or not. So you don't, you could be coming in from Australia, and we will assist you. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And we only need about 7 days. So about 7 days before you're planning to come in. The more time, the better, always. But if you give us 7 days, you're going to be sorted by the time you need to come in.
If I could add to that, for US bands that are going over for just a handful of dates, in the Canadian major markets, if it's Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Vancouver, we generally provide them, with the contract, the agreement for the performance, and we ask that promoters give us a letter showing that the venue is exempt from needing to have work permits. It's actually gotten to the point now where promoters will tell us, "Oh, you don't need that letter," but from our side of things, we want to have our artists present, that documentation. And the outside of work permit, The artists do need to remember if they are getting paid in Canada, there are federal, you know, there's federal tax on your earnings and provincial tax in Quebec. So that's just something that you can coordinate with the promoter, how you can either apply for a tax waiver, or how to address that after the fact when you're doing your annual U.S. taxes. But for the most part, it's almost seamless for a band, whether they're from the United States or someone that's traveling from abroad to the US, to route in Canadian dates, which hopefully that continues to be the case. And one thing I do want to flag, if an artist is performing in the US without the proper documentation, then they go into Canada. When they're returning to US, that is another scenario in which it might be found out that you're not performing in the US with the required visas. So just to echo what Will was saying before, like just adding on dates when you have like a South by Southwest, that should be that where you're don't need to have a visa for, say, Folk Alliance or South by Southwest, and then deciding to add on other dates because you're already here. It's just highly inadvisable and could negatively impact your ability to get a proper visa, performance visa in the future.
Great. We'll move on to our next question then. Renato asks, I'm curious, have you noticed it becoming more difficult recently for Brazilian musicians to qualify for the O1 visa?
That's a really good question. So to take a quick step back, for anyone who is not a Canadian citizen, citizens from every other country in the world other than Canadians, getting a US work visa, an O1 visa or a P visa, is a two-step process. The first step is filing we've been referring to this throughout, what's called a petition with the US Immigration Service here in the US. The purpose of the petition, there's basically two things you need to do with the petition. Show that the artist is qualified for the visa classification they're seeking. So as Liana was saying earlier, you need to show that you have extraordinary ability and renown if you're seeking an O1. If it's a P1 for a group, you need to show that the group has been internationally recognized for at least a year. If it's P3, you need to show that the artist performs some sort of culturally unique art form. So some sort of non-US traditional or folk art form. The second thing you need to do in the petition is show that the artist has work in the US, and that's where someone like Mahmoud or even Paula comes into play, showing that there's actual dates in the US. So that's the petition. That's the more time-consuming, you submit a giant stack of papers, you hire someone like us to prepare them for you. It's the time-consuming, expensive, complicated part of the process, usually. The second step of the process happens after you get the approval of the petition. So once you get the approval of the petition from USCIS, you move on to the second step, which is that each individual, so if it's a group, everyone in the group does an online visa application called DS-160, pays a $205 fee, usually $205, and does a visa interview at their local US embassy or consulate. Now, for artists from the global north, this part of the process, and for people who don't have any criminal record, there's no, security concerns, things like that. This part of the process is usually very straightforward. It's this second step in the process where the government assesses whether or not the person is a security threat or likely to overstay their visa. So if you are, for example, coming from the UK or Australia, a rich country that the US has a good relationship with, and you don't have any past visa violations or a criminal record, anything like that, the second step of the process is usually quick and straightforward. For artists from the global south, unfortunately, and this is not a Trump thing, this has been the case for years, since 9/11, basically, this part of the process can be a lot more challenging. because the government starts from the presumption. So the visa officer, the consular officer who's interviewing you at your visa appointment, legally has to start from the assumption that you are you intend to illegally, or you intend to permanently immigrate to the US. They have to start from that assumption, and then the applicant has to overcome that presumption. And again, if you're coming from a richer country, that presumption is usually pretty easily overcomable. But for someone from countries that are, are poor countries, or countries that the US doesn't have good relationships with, or countries from which a lot of people overstay their visas, Brazil being one of those, that part of the process can be more challenging. Specifically in Brazil, we are seeing major problems at the US consulate in, I always mix up whether it's Rio or Sao Paulo. I think it's Rio. I should double check. Let me double check this. Either Rio or Sao Paulo is having really significant problems. So but there's a number of US consulates in Brazil that you can go to an interview at that are not as challenging as I think Rio, that I will double check in a second. So to answer this person's question, it has gotten harder if you are applying in Rio. If not, it's about the same as it's always been, which is, it can be challenging, but the first part of the process has remained unchanged basically for at least a couple of years now, the petition part of the process. So establishing your renown as an O1 artist is about the same as it was last year or 2 years ago. Yeah.
That's great, Will. Thank you. And that actually, oh, Mahmoud, do you want to jump in?
This is, I'm gonna bounce this back to Will. We've been talking about, P1 visa, it can be a year, O1 visa can be 3 years, but when you're applying for the visa, you also need to show that you have activity in the US for that year. It isn't just like I have one show and then I'm going to get a year-long visa. So could you touch on what we actually need to provide USCIS activity-wise?
Yeah, this is part of probably the trickiest part of the petition process, is showing that you will have US work for the full period of the visa that you're applying for. So the fees are the same whether you're applying for one tour or a full year or 3 years. So we always try to help our clients maximize that time period so they're getting the most bang for their buck. But it can be challenging because you need to, if you're applying for a 3-year O1 visa, you need to submit a 3-year itinerary, which is as absurd as it sounds. No one's booking shows 3 years in advance. And if you're applying, as Mahmoud said, like, you'd really need to apply far in advance now if you're going to be able to avoid the premium processing fee, that expediting fee that we've talked about. So if you're applying for a visa 3.5 years, like, no one's booking shows 3.5 years in advance. So it's sort of a crazy thing. But they're supposed to take industry standards into account when they're assessing the itinerary. So, and they've gotten, actually, this is one area where they've become a little bit more flexible over the last 5 or 10 years. There's a degree of flexibility with that requirement. But you do need to show that there's some contractual relationship that lasts the full 3 years. So if you have a booking agent, it can be an agreement with your booking agent. If you can put down on paper that Concerted Efforts is the exclusive US agent for this artist, and the term of our agreement spans this full 3-year time period, we are submitting an itinerary of confirmed and projected dates, good faith projected dates based on past touring history, and our relationships in the industry, that can work. Or record label, if you have a long-term relationship with a record label, that can work. Or if you don't have either of those things, but you have a relationship with a venue or a promoter in the US who can say that they're going to book you, or they intend to book you, say, twice a year or 3 times a year over that 3-year period, that can work too. But basically, like I said, there needs to be some contractual obligation for the artist to be in the US spanning that full time period, which could be really challenging especially if you don't have an agent, don't have a label, you don't have any contacts in the US. It can be really, really tough.
This plays in really nicely to a question that Susan asked, which is if an artist has a 1-year visa and comes to the US for like a 6-week long tour and then returns to their home country, how difficult is it to return to the US for another leg of the tour later in the year under the same visa? Is that even possible?
I mean, if
Well,
go ahead.
well, I
Oh,
was going to say they're multi-entry visas. It should not be an issue. So you have, once you've done your initial clearance, then there shouldn't be any issue because they are intended to be multi-entry. You can reside there. Like if you've got a residency or somebody, let's say you're working for, we process a lot of people going in to work for Disney or to work for an orchestra or on Broadway, where that's a long-term contract. So of course they're going to live there because they have to work for the vast majority of the week. So it should not be an issue, and it should be smoother because you've got your visa, it's called an I-94 departure record. So which again, after your initial entry, you should, go on the website where you, download your I-94 and keep it in your passport. So, okay. So I'm sorry, Mahmoud, I don't know if that was the same or if you had a different experience, but at least specifically for the P2, it's intended as multi-entry, but you may stay.
yeah. So the thing that I was throwing to Will is that you just need the duration of your visa will reflect what activity you can show. And that isn't just your activity in the US, it's also showing what you'll be doing when you're not in the US, because part of the concern is someone has a year-long visa and then they're just here. So your itinerary should show what you're doing worldwide to illustrate the need for, you have US dates that are spread across the year or whatever the visa period is. You need to illustrate that. But you also need to illustrate what you'll be doing in your home territory, other territories, because as Will, when he was discussing the visas for artists from the global South, there is this idea that the thought process from USCIS is that you're just staying unless you can show that you're not staying. But yes, if you have a year-long visa and you're in and out for various legs, that should not be a problem.
Great. Encore's question goes back a little bit to kind of our previous question, which is that we've had a lot of interest in the US for a tour with Samba Touré from Mali, but Mali is on the quote unquote yellow list. What does that mean for touring from countries like this in Western Africa?
So I can take this one if that's okay. The last week, 2 weeks ago, I forget when it was, I should check. Trump implemented a travel ban on a number of countries. It impacts, I think it's June 4th. That the travel ban was announced, and then it took effect on June 9th. And it impacts travelers from as like I think it's 12 countries for that are like totally banned. And then there's restrictions on several other countries. They also there was reporting today, I think, that they're considering there's 36 countries that they're considering adding to the travel ban, depending on, so they're giving these countries 60 days to address what they're calling, I think, like security, like vetting. They want to make sure these countries are vetting their travelers, I guess. And so there are 36 additional countries that could sometime after the next 60 days be added to this travel ban. Mostly African countries, but not totally. So this is news as of today. Mali was on so a couple months ago there was a list that was reported in the New York Times and elsewhere that predates the actual travel bans, where there were, I think it was a leak from the government, like that was leaked from the government, and they had countries in a couple different categories. For example, Mali, I guess, was on the yellow list, that might face some sort of travel restriction. I don't think that Mali is on. Actually, I know Mali is not on the list, the current list, or this new list of 36 possible countries. But I think, it's an unpredictable government, and who knows what, I don't know. I wouldn't, since Mali was on that initial leaked list, it's possible that they could be subject, travelers from Mali could be subject to a travel ban. The way that the current travel ban is being implemented is basically, if you did not have a visa on June 9th, and you were not in the US on June 9th, and you're from one of these, I think it's 12 countries, um, and you don't have dual citizenship with another country that's not subject to a ban, you're basically fully banned from getting a visa and traveling to the US. There are the the ban does provide for the possibility of an exception, if you can show that your travel would be in the national interest of the United States. You might be able to qualify for a national interest exception. In the first Trump administration, we were able to successfully get a pretty solid handful of exceptions, for artists, which was sort of a really gratifying experience to help artists get around this travel ban. It's too early to know if this new, Trump 2, 2.0, if this travel ban is going to operate the same way, if the exceptions are going to be accessible to artists, or if they're going to be really difficult to get or too time consuming. We are currently working with a well-known Haitian artist. Haiti is one of the countries that's subject to a total ban. We're currently sort of guinea pigging this one Haitian artist, who is a high-profile artist, has high-profile dates booked. We're trying to get him an exception. He hasn't applied yet, but we're hoping that we'll know more about how that's going to work soon. But yeah, it's so much of the visa stuff right now, like immigration, is working normally for artists, surprisingly. But this travel ban is one very notable and important exception. Another one I would say is that artists who are trans or gender nonconforming or intersex are dealing with a whole separate set of issues related to Trump's early executive order, where he said that, I'm mindful that we're running out of time, so I'll try to make this fast, but Trump in January issued an executive order basically saying that there are only two sexes and they cannot be changed, which I won't editorialize too much, but the impact of that on trans artists is that they need to. So the guidance from the immigration agencies has been based on that executive order, has been, when you're applying for a visa, you should indicate the sex that you were assigned at birth. So if you are trans, say you're a trans woman, but you were assigned male at birth, even if your passport says female, they want you to say that you're male on your visa application. They've also said that they won't deny USCIS has said they won't deny a petition based solely on someone answering that question incorrectly. And we have had artists who have successfully gotten visas, we've had trans artists list their actual gender, and get visas, even though that's not the gender that's on their birth, or the sex that's on their birth certificate. So there's been a lot of reporting on this. There's a lot of anxiety for understandable reasons. The quick takeaway is that this is not a ban on trans artists traveling to the US, but it is a nuanced and complex and very personal, you know, it's very nuanced for each individual. So if you have any questions about that, I'm very happy to talk about that offline. Yeah, that's a long way of answering the question about Mali.
That's great. I think Ankur had some follow-up questions that he sent in the Q&A, but if you just want to direct those at Will separately, I think we should be able to address them. Also, because I know we're running out of time, Candia, hi. I think that Liana will be able to answer your questions. So Liana, if you don't mind, maybe Candia, if you could just send her an email, but should all be, oh, okay, great. Be able to get covered. Ankur saying that he's chatted with you before, Will, so
Oh.
that's great.
Oh.
So everything's coming in at once. I saw one more question, if we can maybe try to address this quickly, in the general chat about the economic climate in the US, if people are still actually going out to watch music, see live music, buy music, what that's like. Candia, mine is on the No Depression website, because I don't think that I can write to everyone right now. But yeah, so if anyone would like to kind of address the question of like the economic climate for music in the US right now.
I think that, you know, it really varies. You know, there's some artists and tours that are, you know, the attendances are really great, and you know, we're still seeing some like unprecedented numbers, but at the same time, there's such a high volume of touring right now, and the costs of not just for the artist touring, but the cost of an individual going to a show has increased. That you know, there are peaks and valleys, and you know, there isn't an across the board downturn, but there are some. I am seeing there certain tours that are performing better attendance wise. You know, maybe it's a band that hasn't been to the States or toured the States for a long time, or if they're on a new album, or they're celebrating an anniversary of an album, or it's a, you know, a curated event or something. I think that the things are still positive for the most part, but there are other tours that you know, if it is an artist that's touring in 2025 after touring in 2024, I think there is some consumer picking and choosing. And it also varies city by city. You know, the major population hubs generally have stronger turnouts than secondary and tertiary markets. So from that, like someone in the chat had also asked about how tariffs are impacting venues, and I can't really say that there's a direct impact, but costs are increasing. You know, and you look at like you know, a festival that, you know, the cost of just getting like fencing or staging or shipping things is increasing exponentially. I think this is another thing that we might not see, excuse me, might not see the impact until 26 and 27, but you know, there's a slight I don't know, malaise that's out there that's increasing as like the overall situation changes day to day. But yeah, I can't say across the board that like, oh, everything's down. Things have been better, things have been worse. And this, I'm speaking just from, you know, my artist perspective and just what I'm seeing in the kind of more rock oriented touring landscape.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Mahmood. And yeah, that we are like right on time. So thank you so much to this incredible panel. One of my big takeaways just from listening and speaking with y'all is that we all care so much. So if any of y'all participants, folks watching after the fact on YouTube, that link is in the chat, by the way, have questions, please reach out to any of us individually. We're here to help. Also just want to thank everyone at Folk Alliance for helping organize this. I saw some familiar names in the chat. Folk Alliance does all of this programming for free, and have also been the victims of an NEA grant that was rescinded. So if you have the means and are so inclined, please consider donating to Folk Alliance. It is a 501c3 and therefore tax-deductible donation. And any other comments, questions, or concerns, please reach out to us. And yeah, thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.